Welcome, my friends, to another Johnny Vedmore read through with me, your host, Johnny Vedmore, and we are going through another one of the Epstein 101 articles again. This is Blackmail and Extortion. It is the third in the series, and yes, it looks at the most famous facet of Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell's operation throughout the 90s and early noughties, especially, which was, of course, blackmail and extortion of powerful people, where they used the lure of encounters with young girls and ladies into to lure these politicians and high-ranking officials and other people into this circle, this cabal. But don't be, these that has all been created to make it look like the people were semi-victims. The people who were lured into these encounters were semi-victims. They were not. This is best described, and I've heard it a couple of times described as a party boat where everybody gets on. I call it like the ballroom of power. Everybody gets involved. You're not allowed to leave the party boat. That's it. You're allowed on the party boat as soon as you're on for good. You're getting involved with all the different actions over here, over here, over here, over here. There's no implicit or tacit sort of agreement that you will do this for them or they will tell about you. It's all in the ether. They all know that they're under the thumb. They get things in return, and in return, they do whatever they're told, and they don't argue. There's no point in arguing because they're on the party boat. You can't get off the party boat, or something like an untimely death will be upon you. And so we all know that this is what the operation looked like. I mean, I've explained in the previous articles about how they recruited young girls. They lured, groomed, seduced their way through young girls, mainly in Palm Beach, in the poorer areas of West Palm Beach. Um, and they managed to you get enough girls that they were able to lure in these other people who were politicians, etc. That was part of their enterprise, but not the whole of their enterprise by far. In actual fact, they were doing it for many different reasons, and like I say, it was mainly just a facet. And the majority of sexual abuse that happened in the Epstein case happened with Jeffrey Epstein himself. Remember, he was seeing 2 to 3 young girls a day. That's a crazy figure when you actually calculate it. If you was seeing 2.5 girls every day over a 10-year period, at the very least, you're talking 1992 to 2002, where this operation was going, while it was going, then he would have had over 8,000 illegal encounters. Yeah, you can imagine that the first case, remember, one allegation. This is a guy who, by that time, is probably got more like 10,000 allegations, potentially prosecutable. That's crazy. And that's the extent of this facet. And it was for a reason. It was for blackmail and extortion. They wanted to be able to make people do what they wanted. And like I say, it wasn't in writing, it wasn't said, it didn't need to be. As soon as you were compromised, as soon as you were within this unit, then you would do whatever was asked of you. And these people kept very small circles. So, without further ado, we should go across to my site. Yes, everybody who knows the Johnny Vedmore read through will know at this point we go over to newspace.com. And here we are. Oh, let me move a couple of little bits around. Here you go. Whoop. and we are in newspaste.com. You come here, as always, Schwab articles, Epstein 101 articles, Bottinger articles, Youngkerman articles, Black Hand series, and many other articles alongside. On the front page, you'll also see the more recent articles, which include Elon Musk and Epstein's relationship, how Elon Musk was put through a Jeffrey Epstein-funded course on how to manipulate people's minds by using things like social media, which seems now convenient, doesn't it? Isn't it convenient that Elon Musk has a social media platform now, that he's able to manipulate people's behavior by using psychological nudges, and he was taught that through a Jeffrey Epstein-funded program. The world is a crazy place. The heroes you are given are not heroes at all. They are usually the villains. They're usually the ones who sit up in a Davosian style mountain lairs where they plan out how to control and manipulate the world. And that's what Epstein was doing. He wasn't only a serial child molester, he was many other things too. And there he is, Epstein and Maxwell. And this is Epstein 101, Blackmail and Extortion by Johnny Vedmore via Newspaste Original. Epstein and Maxwell's primary goal was to infiltrate the halls of power. Their priority targets were those Democratic politicians who had the potential to make it all the way to the White House. To truly realize what Epstein and Maxwell had designed, as well as to understand influence operations more generally, you must first be able to tell the difference between blackmail and extortion. And there they are again. Before investigating the complex criminal enterprise created by Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell, it is vital for any commentator to understand the crimes which were being perpetrated by the couple. Many people refer to Epstein and Maxwell's main sexual compromise operations as sex blackmail, and you will often hear the word blackmail being bandied about the media, discussing this and falling under a dark example of organized sexual exploitation. You may also be led to believe that, as this is one of the most well-researched cases in modern history, every angle has been examined. However, the operation they ran and how it functioned is not fully understood by most, and the facts often take a back seat to the many more salacious scandals involving politicians and celebrities. The majority of those interested in the case assume that the famous faces who were targeted by Epstein's operations were simply being blackmailed, and that they don't truly understand the nuance involved in such an intelligence operation. However, Epstein and Maxwell were not blackmailing people. In fact, they were mostly extorting their targets. The difference being blackmail and extortion must be understood if you want to truly wish to realize the seriousness of the crimes committed by these infamous international child traffickers. The history of blackmail. The term blackmail is believed to have been first used in Scotland during the 1500s and supposed to have originated from blackmail. This term was a way to describe a payment farmers and property owners made to prospective plunderers in return for not having their land damaged. Linguistically speaking, the modern way in which we use blackmail is actually a combination of two separate terms, with the modern usage becoming a combination of black money, black, and rent, derived from the old Scandinavian word mal, meaning agreement. Unlike modern times, in early Scottish law, both sides of the blackmail scheme were considered criminals. The Law and Customs of Scotland, published in 17th century, allow us insight behind the reasoning for also prosecuting the victim of blackmail scheme, stating clearly, the reason the givers are liable is because they maintain the thieves. For most people, the concept of blackmailing an individual or an organizational structure seems a relatively simple process to identify and understand. But like any illicit activity, blackmail is much more complex and nuanced than most people can first comprehend. Blackmail is regularly defined as an attempt to obtain money, goods, or favor from a person by threatening to publicize information that would incriminate, embarrass, or otherwise socially damage the victim. For blackmail to exist, a few constituent parts are required. Firstly, there needs to be a perpetrator, and although it is often perceived as a white-collar crime, in reality, anyone can commit blackmail. Secondly, a blackmailer requires a victim, and even though anyone can become a victim of blackmail, the most likely targets of these operations are people with political power who have access to government or corporate secrets. Although the most important factor for perpetrator of blackmail is that their target has financial resources. Thirdly, once the perpetrator has identified their target, they then issue their demands, followed by a threat to reveal the socially or economically damaging information if those requirements are not met. But there are many contradictions, both legally and practically, concerning the subject of blackmail. Sidney Wallace DeLong, a professor at Seattle's University School of Law, has spent his academic career studying legal aspects of blackmail, bribery, and extortion, and has become one of the foremost experts on these subjects within law. In a 1993 paper by DeLong entitled Blackmailers, Bribe Takers, and Second Paradox, which was published in the University of Pennsylvania Law Review, DeLong explains, the criminalization of blackmail has been considered paradoxical because it would make unlawful a threat to do something the threatener has a legal right to do. The blackmailer threatens to disclose an embarrassing or harmful secret of the victim unless she is paid for secrecy. She may lawfully disclose the victim's secrets and may lawfully make an unconditional threat to disclose it. The threat becomes unlawful only when coupled with the offer to keep the secret in return for payment. Yet most victims of blackmail would presumably prefer such an offer to an unconditional threat. The offer cannot make the victim worse off than the unconditional threat, and it might make him better off if given him the opportunity to buy the menace's silence. Thus, it seems paradoxical to permit the unconditional threat and prohibit blackmail. Within a decade of DeLong's aforementioned paper, his work had influenced other thinkers into calling for blackmail to be made legal. In another study of blackmail, which was published in the Business Ethics Quarterly in 2000, and which heavily quoted DeLong's work, the author of the paper, entitled The Second Paradox of Blackmail, begins by explaining, one so-called paradox of blackmail concerns the fact that two legal whites together make a black. That is, it is illicit to threaten to reveal a person's secret, and it is separately lawful to ask him for money. But when both are undertaken at once together, this act is called blackmail and is prohibited. The second so-called paradox is that if the blackmailer initiates the act, this is seen by jurists as blackmail and illicit, while if the blackmailee, the person blackmailed, originates the contract, this is commonly interpreted as bribery and is not illicit. What is intriguing about this paper in particular, written whilst Epstein and Maxwell's blackmail operation was arguably at its peak, is that its authors, Block, Kinsella, and Hope, use libertarian theory to reject the claim that blackmail should be unlawful, going on to claim that if this act, blackmail, were legalized, then both paradoxes would disappear. Although many of us may be found wincing at the idea of legalizing blackmail, DeLong's work and that of other libertarian-leaning scholars continued to make a case for the legalization of blackmail to this very day. In a 2020 critique of the so-called Me Too movement, DeLong released his paper, Paradigm Shift, Me Too and the Paradox of Bribery Secrets, published in the University of Pacific Law Review. In this journal piece, DeLong does make it clear that legalization of blackmail should only be applied so long as what is threatened is not itself tortious or criminal. Even within the more extreme beliefs about the consequences of blackmail, it seems to be an accepted fact that some forms of blackmail are considered to be wholly unacceptable, regardless of one's ideological leanings. In the Epstein and Maxwell case, to successfully blackmail their chosen target, the duo had to break a variety of laws in many countries. To define Epstein and Maxwell's industrial sex compromise operation, we must first define whether what they were doing would be wholly considered blackmail, or was it in fact a much more serious crime of extortion. Many people assume that blackmail and extortion are the same action. Both extortion and blackmail are forms of coercion, and both constitute the use of threats to manipulate the actions of the victim to benefit of the blackmailer, extortioner, and or their conspirators. In fact, blackmail is a subset of extortion which uses specific threats to release damaging information pertaining to the victim. However, extortion, which like blackmail is form of coercion for benefit, is accompanied by threats that can include violence, kidnapping, destruction of property or reputation, or most pertinently, the misuse of government office. When we examine the Epstein-Maxwell sex compromise operation, it is clear that we are not dealing with simple blackmailers, but instead their operation was one which involved the extortion of their chosen marks. Even the most far-reaching libertarian-led, DeLong-inspired legal eagles are not able to find a way to make Epstein and Maxwell's operation legally acceptable. Yet, regardless of the words we use here, commonly, the majority of Epstein and Maxwell's behavior will continue to be described as blackmail, whether or not it's the most accurate term to use. The sharp end of the stick. While examining historic cases of proven criminal conspiracy, one soon finds that it's very natural for there to be an ever-present human desire for drama and controversy. Blackmail and extortion have always been activities which have caused a social stir among the spectating public, who are often found baying for the blood of those in society who have been deemed as lacking virtue. The sensational world of the rich and famous has continuously drawn in very eager crowds, and seeing as the elite of our societies have the vast majority of the available capital, the crime of blackmail obviously disproportionately affects those who have amassed a reasonably large amount of wealth. This drama is not a new occurrence. In fact, blackmailing schemes have been in operation throughout recorded history and, by their very nature, have often led to a public unveiling of the illicit information, whether or not the specific bribe requested has been successfully acquired. Historically speaking, there have been many occasions where the most elite members of the ruling establishment were the victims of blackmail and extortion. Some of these were unlucky, yet also very wealthy and powerful targets have refused to pay along with their blackmailers' demands, or to play along, sorry, with their blackmailers' demands. The first Duke of Wellington, Sir Arthur Wellesley, famously refused to give in to the demands of a blackmail attempt by a 19th century courtesan named Harriet Wilson. The enterprising Wilson was attempting to blackmail not only a powerful duke, but one who had been the tactical genius behind some of Britain's most successful Napoleonic era military campaigns, as well as also being a former Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. Harriet Wilson demanded payment from Wellesley. In return, she would keep various sordid revelations about him out of her upcoming book. The Duke famously rebuked her attempts at blackmail, reportedly shouting aloud, "Publish and be damned." you go. That's Erwin Wellesley in a cartoon piece called The Flat Catcher and the Rat Catcher. Flat catcher. You're a flat catcher, sir, I tells you. The caricature of Harriet Wilson and Arthur Wellesley available in print at the National Portrait Gallery. But others who were in a position of power throughout key moments in history were not so confident as to leave the judgment of their character or behavior up to the general public. Alexander Hamilton, who now has a hit Broadway musical about his life, once paid $1,000 to a husband of a woman with whom he was having an affair. The woman's husband had threatened to reveal the relationship and in turn to ruin Hamilton's public credibility, but even though Hamilton paid the initial blackmail demand, he later chose to ignore follow-up requests for payment. Both the Duke of Wellington and Alexander Hamilton were victims of blackmail rather than extortion. The people involved were not forced to misuse public office by their blackmailers. They were not threatened with violence or kidnapping. They were not victims of extortion, at least as far as we know. The use of a sexual lure to compromise the wealthy and powerful in society is also not a new occurrence. If prostitution can be considered as the oldest profession, it could easily be argued that, in turn, the art of sexual compromise is one of the oldest tools for infiltrating a target or organization. Many of us read books or watch movies, both fact and fiction, about the saucy and surreptitious romantic affairs of some of the most powerful people in recorded history. The concept of sexual compromise isn't only a reoccurring theme in real life sagas, it is also a frivolously used trope in fiction writing. Whether it be Delilah undercutting Samson's power once she's lured him in with lust, or one of the many stories of the past of another industrious courtesan stealing the king's ear, sexual relationships have helped change the minds and actions of some of the most powerful men throughout recorded history. Most rulers throughout history were extremely cognizant of the potential for their reign to be cut short due to serious betrayal by alluring beauties. Like Ghislaine Maxwell herself, many of those women who had perpetrated sexual compromise operations in the past were all too often pushing their own familial agendas. King Henry VIII may have been afflicted with a constant wandering eye, but he wasn't simply the randy fat king which he is often portrayed to be. Henry Tudor, along with every other ruler of male-dominated past, knew that the charms of a woman could be used to curry their favor, sway their opinion, as well as having potentially lethal consequences. Women have played an important role throughout history in regards to sexual compromise operations. They have been strategically used as tools by very powerful men, and they have also often been the first to suffer the consequences. Our history is littered with the corpses of women who have been used by men as a weapon to penetrate the private bedchambers of the most powerful people on earth. But the past is also littered with women who have used other women, often controlling them on behalf of the wealthier and powerful men, women such as Ghislaine Maxwell. As we are all aware, there has been a major cultural shift over the past century concerning how women are viewed within society. 100 years of progress has seen women become increasingly empowered, and by the birth of the Epstein and Maxwell's sex compromise operation at the turn of the 90s, women in the Western world had been given a false sense of security, safety, and empowerment. Many young girls growing up in this environment were sure that they were the first generation of women to be truly free of some of the most horrific examples of sexism and exploitation. Women began to believe that the 1990s heralded the beginning of a new era of true equality between genders. Yet throughout that decade, Epstein and Maxwell were recruiting female children to go into high schools, swimming pools, shopping malls, and even their friends' homes, so as to lure in new kids who they could groom and abuse. This was not a new era, which it had originally been framed as. The Epstein-Maxwell compromise operation. Once Epstein and Maxwell's team of elite groomers had gathered a large enough pool of young girls, they began to use the human collateral to infiltrate their targets' lives. This small gang managed to groom hundreds of young girls, and they seemingly acted without fear for over a decade. Epstein and Maxwell targeted powerful elites and those in upper echelons of government and business for a very good reason. They knew that whatever acts these people committed were, in a sense, insured by their wealth or status. Because if any of these actions were uncovered by the authorities, press, or most other official bodies, a systematic cover up would likely ensue. For instance, the investigation into the Franklin scandal during the 1980s stalled when allegations arose that children were being flown to Washington, D.C. for establishment sex parties. Such rumors of illicit debauchery at the center of power doesn't only attract significant attention from the press. To micromanage any scandal, specialists are brought in, some to manage negative PR, while others to study potential legal avenues, but all of them close ranks, something which only benefits any offender. Epstein and Maxwell knew that this safety net surrounded them while they were mingling with those in power, and most of the people they met would have known this too. Another theme strewn throughout Western history is the establishment cover up to protect the wealthy and powerful. Maxwell and Epstein knew that they were protected far beyond the average child trafficker. It is also unlikely that they were using a direct or simplistic form of blackmail or extortion when targeting a mark. Epstein and Maxwell may have been surfing in between the lines of culpability, partly protected from investigation and prosecution by their association with the elites, but they knew that there is always a comprehensible risk involved when partaking in such illicit or illegal activities. For Epstein and Maxwell, the most important dynamic was that people who became involved with their network had their public credibility inextricably linked to the wealthy child trafficking duo and whatever eventual fate awaited them. Ghislaine Maxwell knew how the elite operated far better than Epstein. From the moment she was born, her father had groomed her to exert power, influence, and control in whichever environment she found herself. From the moment in 1991 when Robert Maxwell's bloated corpse was pulled from the salty water, Ghislaine was left off the leash and strove to become a force of nature. She had spent her life surrounded by the wealthy movers and shakers of high society, and she knew all their proclivities and what they desired. It was the same year as her father's death when Maxwell supposedly met Epstein, and when she was said to have been desperately lonely. Although there are rumors that they had met beforehand. Regardless, within no time whatsoever, this pair had set up and initiated this sophisticated grooming operation. Throughout the 1990s, although Epstein made various donations to political candidates publicly, he also found ways to do business with them outside the realm of official politics. One of the earliest examples of Epstein's focused political infiltration started within 2 years of Robert Maxwell's death. In 1993, Epstein purchased a notorious 10,000-acre Zorro Ranch in New Mexico. But the acquisition wasn't just a simple purchase from a random seller. The Zorro Ranch, which Epstein purchased, was owned by the former governor of New Mexico, Governor Bruce King. In the decade following Epstein's purchase of the vast New Mexico compound, he also donated $15,000 to the campaign for the New Mexico Attorney General candidate Gary King, the son of Governor Bruce King. The King family had been powerful New Mexico agriculture and political dynasty and retained leasing rights over a total of 1,159 acres of the surrounding land. Once Epstein had begun to set up Zorro Ranch project, he also began donating to the campaigns of Jim Bakker in his race to become land commissioner in the region, as well as donating $2,000 to Greg Solano during his campaign to be elected Santa Fe County Sheriff. King and Solano denied ever meeting Jeffrey Epstein, with Gary King saying publicly, "I don't think I ever met him personally," maybe suggesting that he had met Epstein professionally, going on to admit he knows other members of the family better. Epstein saw a very unique potential for the extremely fruitful opportunity in New Mexico, and he obviously viewed the Zorro Ranch as a base for multifaceted operational potential. It was reported that Epstein started to expand his New Mexico estate in around 1994 with the construction of stables, detached garage, and other homes alongside the building of a mansion on the estate, which began in 1999. The mansion which Epstein had constructed on the Zorro Ranch estate was the largest in New Mexico at the time. It sat around 26,700 square feet. Later reports would expand this figure to 33,339 square feet, with all structures eventually totaling around 57,420 square feet. Located on a hilltop above Santa Fe County, the estate also hosted its own 4,400-foot-long airstrip, helipad, and airplane hangar. For a former arms smuggler come child trafficker, Epstein was well aware Zorro Ranch is located in a prime position to potentially move weapons or humans across the nearby U.S.-Mexico border. Although Epstein was busy handing out small donations to people occupying various political offices in New Mexico, there was one man in particular who became his focus: Wild Bill Richardson. William Blaine Richardson III, known as Bill Richardson, served as a member of U.S. House of Representatives for New Mexico's 3rd District from between the 3rd of January 1983 until the 13th of February 1997. After he left the House of Representatives to serve a short stint as the ambassador of the United Nations. However, Richardson seems to have had a habit of courting constant controversy wherever he was placed. While at the United Nations, his only official task was to forge a ceasefire with an Afghani warlord, and although at first it was seen as successful, the ceasefire did not hold. It was during this year at the UN when Richardson became embroiled in the Monica Lewinsky scandal, which threatened to bring down Bill Clinton's administration. In 1998, it was revealed that while Richardson was at the United Nations, he had offered Miss Lewinsky a position as a senior staff person. Bill Richardson was found to have lied at the Senate confirmation hearing about the position offered to Miss Lewinsky. In an article on the 21st of August 1998 by Reed Irvin and Cliff Kincaid, the author states, "There were three main areas where Richardson deceived the panel. He had claimed that the position offered to Monica was an existing slot, though it later turned out not to have been so. There was no effort to fill the job that Monica was offered until 3 months later, after the scandal had broken publicly. Secondly, Richardson described the job as low level. Monica was offered a $30,000 a year. The senior staff person, Paul Aronson, who later filled a slot that Richardson said was the same when offered to Monica, was paid more than double what Monica was offered, plus had high-level experience in areas such as nuclear disarmament and UN dues controversy." Regardless of the latter controversy and the fact that Richardson failed to impress as the ambassador to the UN, he was soon after confirmed as Bill Clinton's Secretary of Energy. But Richardson soon found himself in trouble at the Department of Energy when a scientist based in Los Alamos National Laboratory, Wen Ho Lee, became under suspicion of providing the Chinese government with nuclear secrets. Eventually, Lee was cleared of any crime and awarded a $1.6 million settlement for the damage done to his reputation. Members of the Senate were quick to publicize Bill Richardson's handling of the espionage inquiry. Richardson defended his actions, stating that he had come to the conclusion that leaving Dr. Lee in his position was an unacceptable risk. After the scandal, Richardson tightened some security measures in an attempt to appease dissenters, but he was receiving criticism from both Democrats and Republicans, with a slew of Republicans calling for his resignation. The ordeal eventually ended Richardson's chance of becoming Al Gore's running mate for the 2000 presidential election. The mouse. After the Clinton administration, Richardson served in various roles unrelated to politics before deciding to run for governor of New Mexico. It is here in 2002 where Epstein donated $50,000 to Richardson's gubernatorial campaign, later donating an extra $50,000 under the company name the Zorro Trust. In 2006, when Epstein was initially arrested and outed publicly as being a pedophile, Bill Richardson's campaign officially donated the Epstein contributions to charities around the state. So was Richardson being extorted, blackmailed, or simply being influenced by Jeffrey Epstein? It's hard to know what other lures are offered behind the scenes during such intelligence-led compromise operations, but Richardson did not avoid accusation of sexual impropriety after being named by Virginia Giuffre as one of her alleged abusers. If you boarded Epstein's proverbial party boat, it was almost impossible to get off untarnished. Zorro Trust. At the turn of the millennium, Epstein employed a couple to manage the Zorro Ranch and the Zorro Trust. Bryce and Karen Gordon moved onto the ranch in the early 2000s, according to the property records. In Epstein's infamous Little Black Book, rumored to actually be Ghislaine Maxwell's address book, Bryce Gordon is listed as being the manager of Zorro Trust, but this elusive couple have so far managed to avoid the public eye. The son of one of Zorro Ranch employee, Ian Royal, who had lived and worked on the estate during the period, is quoted as saying, "I can't believe Karen and Bryce have hardly been spoken about. They're ghosts." Royal went on to tell reporters, "They're smart people. They wouldn't have been where they were with Epstein if they hadn't have had some level of intelligence." Adding later, whenever he, Epstein, had visitors, he was making sure the ranch was taken care of, and Bryce and Karen were the two that he would talk to make sure that happened. In 2008, an entity called the Zorro Trust claimed a winning Powerball lottery ticket worth $85 million, which had been purchased at the Stripes convenience store in Altus, Oklahoma. This, of course, later led to widespread speculation that the pedophile billionaire had been a lottery winner. The win yielded Zorro Trust $29.3 million after taxes. However, that money wasn't destined for Epstein's bank account. In fact, the lucky ticket holder was actually a lady who worked at a supermarket located opposite the store where the ticket was bought. She decided to use the name Zorro Trust when claiming her prize, a decision which was unrelated to Epstein's organization of the same name. While investigating Epstein's intentions for his Zorro estate, it's clear that his New Mexico property was designed to be more than just a place to gather compromising information about those in power. Some of the rumors surrounding Epstein's plans for the property would normally be considered akin to science fiction. As with many of the more fantastical stories surrounding the life and times of Jeffrey Epstein, there is little to no evidence to back up most of the claims. However, Epstein was growing a network of scientists throughout this period, supposedly with grander designs in mind. Official architect plans uncovered by the Albuquerque radio station Rock of Talk's owner Eddie Aragon date back to 1998, 5 years after Epstein had first acquired the Zorro Ranch. The plans reportedly show a massive underground facility reaching about 8,000 square feet, which was designed to include a gym, massage rooms, jacuzzi rooms, and swimming pool. Here's the Zorro Ranch as it was. During the period in which Epstein was establishing connections with local politicians and other elected officials in New Mexico, he was also beginning to support a broader array of mainly Democrat grandees who were likely to gain political power in the near future. Epstein could be perceived as hedging his bets, politically speaking, in an effort to support the politicians most likely to be elected into the position of significant political influences within the American system. Keep clicking that button, my finger's crazy. Whew. Throughout the period we're examining in this series, Epstein donated to various Senate campaigns, including that of Joe Lieberman. In around 1986, a close friend of Les Wexner's insurance mogul, Robert Meister, became a person who originally introduced Wexner and Epstein while Meister was handling insurance for Wexner's The Limited. By September 1997, Meister had reportedly become extremely wary of Epstein's behavior and warned Wexner about his associating with the mysterious money man. Meister later said, "My wife and I told him," Wexner, "and Abigail hundreds of times to stay away from Epstein." Speaking to Vanity Fair in 2021, Meister said that he and his wife attended Wexner's 60th birthday dinner at the Ohio estate, and in front of former Senator Joe Lieberman and real estate developer Marshall Rose, Meister begged Les Wexner to sever his ties with Epstein. Les wouldn't listen, explained Meister, telling Vanity Fair that it was the last occasion where he visited Wexner's home. It wasn't only Les and Abigail Wexner who ignored the warnings of people such as Meister. Many people had understood Epstein to be a dangerous and unpredictable entity. U.S. senators, such as then Democrat Joe Lieberman, were exactly the potential political leaders who were expected to increase their influence over the coming era. When the scandal hit, Bill Richardson failed to get on the Gore presidential campaign ticket. Lieberman himself went on to run alongside Al Gore in an attempt to become the vice president of the United States. Epstein was focused on financially infiltrating members of the Democratic Party who were likely to sit in the office of President of the United States in the near future. Possibly the most powerful political dynasty in modern U.S. history were of great importance to Epstein's political influence activities. The Clintons weren't only receiving financial donations from Epstein publicly. Bill Clinton in particular eventually teamed up with Epstein's operation. If one considers Bill Clinton to have been simply an unwitting victim of Epstein's operation, one would have to ignore a lot of clear evidence of his extremely close relationship with the perverse billionaire, as well as his outright complicity. In the next two parts of Epstein 101 series, we will learn more about the relationship between former President Bill Clinton and Jeffrey Epstein. But we'll also look at Epstein's targeting of political heavyweights who he believed had the potential to make it all the way to the White House. One of those politicians who had links to Epstein is a current contender to become president of the United States, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. We'll look at their relationship too. And we did. We do. We will in the next one when I read through those. As you can see, you can read coercion and abuse the previous one below, or you can learn about Elon Musk's relationship with Jeffrey Epstein through the Edge Foundation, and how Elon Musk was trained in psychological manipulation via a Jeffrey Epstein-funded program. Causing trouble as always. Article based on my research from One Nation Under Blackmail while I was doing one research for One Nation Under Blackmail is this is probably the clunkiest of them, at least the second half. But I found it really interesting, the extortion aspect, blackmail and extortion, the distinctions, the understanding of what was really happening. And this was a operation, an enterprise that was perfect to examine, to see a fundamental example of those. They're very clear examples of extortion and blackmail. And it was a very, 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 very interesting and informative article to research. Course research for a chapter of a book, but then expanded and changed. And to be perfectly honest, if I was to investigate each of these bits individually, I get a different, I get some extra information come up always. It's really interesting. You remember they were doing a lot. They weren't just doing a little, they were doing a lot. And we'll see that in the next one. In the next episode of Epstein 101, I go into his relationship with these powerful people like Bill Clinton, RFK Jr., and others. And one of the things is, or at least Bill Clinton on the next one, and RFK Jr. on the one after. What's really interesting about the relationship, the dance with power, is that you've got these powerful people who we know where they were. We know some elements of where Jeffrey Epstein was because of his flight logs, but we know where he is, and we know where politicians like Bill Clinton are, because you can just look that day where they are in the news. They're regularly reported back in the late 90s and early noughties. And so it meant I was able to look in depth of their Africa and Asia trips, and really, really interesting. I was able to find pictures that had previously been not noticed, that have now been deleted from the Singaporean archives. And I went day by day. Each day I went through all of the newspapers that were around those days of the regions that they went to in Africa and Asia, and I looked for as much information as I could find and see if I could find any photos. And I found a couple, so that was pretty cool. We'll see those on the next time. But Epstein 101 is supposed to give you a little bit of an extra sort of like a perspective at what these operations look like. Because these operations aren't simply blackmail operations. These are extortion, but extortion implicitly it's what's the word? Implied. It's implied. It's implicit. It's implied. That if you don't do what they say, then they will punish you. So you will just do what they say. And it will be punishment that will be devastating, not just in a blackmail way, not just, ooh, it's saucy. And you've got no bargain, you've got no deal. You can't say, I'll pay you money. They don't care. They don't care about the money. It's not about the money, so it's not blackmail. They're extorting. That's interesting. Those distinctions are interesting, and I hope you enjoyed it. Join me on the next time. Remember, I need your support. I need everybody's support. You can become a patron and support the work. You can buy me a coffee or Ko-fi. It's easy to find all those links on the top of newspaste.com. to support my work, and I do need your help. It's really hard to I have loads of plans for the future, and I would be doing 20 times more if I had some funding, and I'm looking for how to fund myself mostly so that I can just do this stuff. And I know that eventually I got a couple of books in me, that's for sure. I've already written like parts of some, so I'd like to do a load of that, but I really need help. So I'm really happy for all of the support that people are giving. These videos go out early to my supporters, and I love you all. Thanks for joining me on this another Johnny Vedmore read through. Bye.
Young generation, like Prime Minister Trudeau, President of Argentina, and so on, that we penetrate the cabinets.